Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 26 on King Henry and his ministers. And this video, ladies and gentlemen, following on from the previous video, we looked at the monasteries. This video is concentrating on what we call the dissolution of the monasteries. Now, dissolution, what does that word mean? Well, if you were to put sugar into a warm cup of tea, the sugar dissolves, it disappears. And what we are looking at here is Henry VIII and his minister, Thomas Cromwell, organising the disappearance, the closure of the monasteries. Now, in this video, there are two key questions for us to try and answer. The first one is why? Why did Henry order Cromwell to dissolve or close the monasteries? And the second question, how? How did this happen? Why and how? Well, let's make a start with the why. Why did Henry and Cromwell dissolve the monasteries? Well, there are three main reasons. One is religious, two is political, and three is financial. Let's examine all three. Let's start with the religious reasons. Now, most historians of this period think that actually this was the least important reason, the least important factor, but it did play some part, so we need to be able to understand that. Reformers, religious reformers like Cromwell and Cranmer, the two Thomases, they disagreed with some of the religious aspects, some of the religious things and ideas that went on in the monasteries. One good example of that was something called chantries. Now, what's that word all about? Chantries. Well, putting it simple, it's pay to pray. What happened was that people, rich people, would pay the monks in the monasteries to pray for souls of dead relatives, or to pray for their souls when the rich person died. Because they all believed in the old Catholic religion, the Catholic Church, the traditional beliefs, that if you could pay and the monks prayed, this would cut down your time in purgatory when you died, a sort of waiting room to go to heaven. Now, the Protestants, the reformers, Cromwell, Cranmer, they disagreed with this idea. They said, no, you don't have to pay to pray. The Protestants said, just pray directly to God. That made more sense to them. So they're saying on religious grounds, these monasteries are not full of good ideas. Let's close them down. As a side note, it's worth remembering, Henry VIII, in fact, allowed two of the monasteries to start up again, one at Bisham Abbey and one at Stixwold, and he ordered and he paid the monks there to pray for his soul when he died and that of his queen Jane Seymour. So we can see really Henry VIII remained a Catholic. He was not as radical as the reformers. So that's the first reason, the religious reasons. Now, second reason, political. We have seen that Henry was very determined to get loyalty. It was important to him. Remember, 1534, he actually introduced new laws, the Act of Supremacy, the Act of Succession, where people had to swear an oath obeying him and accepting his dominance of the church, his superiority. They had to show their loyalty to him. There's a question for Henry in his mind. He's saying, if the monks are loyal to the Pope as head of the Catholic Church, then they can't fully be loyal to him, King Henry, as head of the Church of England. So, a query begins to arise in his head, a suspicion. maybe these monks are not loyal to me. Put that together with something that happened, a rebellion against King Henry known as the Pilgrimage of Grace. We'll look at it in a video coming up soon. Well, some monasteries, some monks supported this rebellion against King Henry. And he went, aha, I told you, some of these monks are not loyal to me. Now, most monks, most of the nuns, did take the oath, recognising Henry's succession and supremacy. In fact, only 18 across the whole of the country refused to take the oath. And I'm sure you can guess what happened to them. Of course, our old friend, the executioner. So, Henry may have thought, well, okay, some of these monks are not loyal to me. I may as well close the whole monastery system as well. Just get rid of them. That means I'm guaranteeing that I'm cutting down, shutting down all possible opposition to me. So the second reason why the monasteries were dissolved was political, loyalty to Henry. Now the third. Again, historians have suggested the third reason is possibly, probably the most important factor, the most important reason. And it's back to our old friend, the money. It was financial. Henry wanted, or Henry needed, more money. Well, some of you might remember a song by Jessie J. It's not about the money, money, money. Well, it was. It was about the money. The monasteries were very, very wealthy. Can you remember how? Bonus points if you said through land. They owned about a third of the English land. Monasteries had an income of about £160,000 per year. That's a lot of money back in Henry VIII's time. This was attractive to Henry. He's thinking, I've upset some of the countries in Europe, the Catholic countries, France and Spain. There may well be future wars fought by England against those countries. Wars are expensive. Wars demand money. The monasteries are rich. Why don't I take their money? Can you see how Henry's mind might have been thinking, might have been working? So he says, if I close the monasteries and take the land, take the money, that will improve the defence of England. He's King of England. He's in charge of defence. So money is right at the centre of the decision to dissolve the monasteries. Secondly, to do with money, remember war's expensive. Normally the way of raising money, raising funds for war, was to go to Parliament and ask for tax raises. But this is unpopular. Henry VIII had remembered back in 1525 he tried to do that, something called the Amicable Grant. If you've forgotten about it, go back and have a look at video 6. It's all there for you. So he's saying, if I'm going to need money for war, and I don't want to go to Parliament and ask for taxes to go up because that's unpopular, why don't I just take it from the monks instead? It was an easy win for him. The third reason, to do with money. Remember, the monks owned huge amounts of land. Well, if there's no monks, if there's no monasteries, that land could either be sold at a slightly lower price by Henry or given away, almost like a bribe. And he could give it or sell it at a low price to the rich nobles, the gentry, important people. They will be pleased because they've got more land so they can make more money. And in return, in exchange, these nobles, these gentry, these important people will support Henry and his religious ideas, his religious reforms. Even the Duke of Norfolk, who was a Catholic, that's one of the top nobles in the country, and a Catholic, even he bought monastery land at a much reduced price. So it's win-win, really. And that's why the money was so important in driving Henry's desire to take the monks' land and close their monasteries. So that's the why. 3 reasons: religious, political, financial. What about the how? How were the monasteries dissolved? Well, of course, Henry isn't going to do all the spade work. Not at all. Who's he going to call? Ghostbusters. No. Who's he going to call? Thomas Cromwell. What did Cromwell do? Well, first of all, he sent preachers. Remember that from the previous video? He sent preachers, people around the country, preaching Cromwell's message. And what was it? Simple one. These monks are not leading good lives. These monks are bad. They're rich. They're keeping their money. They're not helping the poor. He's trying to spread the message so that the community do not support the monks. That idea of showing them respect is trying to be reduced. Also, the preacher said, look, if we take all their land, your taxes won't go up. It will be better for you. So it was a clever move by Cromwell to prepare the ground and persuade people that really closing the monasteries was good for the people. Clever. Then, 1535, Cromwell introduces a survey into the wealth, starting with the smaller monasteries. Now, this survey was called Value of the Church, Valor Ecclesiasticus in Latin. And a series of inspections were held, called visitations. Cromwell's commissioners were sent to the monasteries with a list of questions. Now, the 2 most famous of them, 2 men called Leighton and Lee. And they were sent questions to ask the monks. Now, imagine one of the questions. They see a monk and he's peeling some potatoes. And so they say to the monk, what are you doing? Are you the friar? No, says the monk. I'm peeling the potatoes to cook them because I'm the chipmunk. I apologise once again for that terrible joke. Sorry. Now, back to serious stuff. These questions, written by Cromwell, asked by the inspectors. And the results were very, very critical of the monks and the nuns. The results said, these monks, they're not leading religious lives. Many of them have fathered children. Many of them have had affairs. They're even helping French pirates. They're a disgrace. It was a really negative stance, saying that these monks were bad. Be careful, though. We need to treat this evidence very, very carefully as historians. Remember, people like Leighton and Lee, the inspectors, they are reporting to Cromwell. They know that Cromwell wants to dissolve the monasteries. Now, if Leighton and Lee are ambitious, they'll give Cromwell what he wants to hear. Oh, Cromwell, we hear you want to get rid of the monasteries. Yes, please. Oh, well, look, we've asked them. They're leading terrible lives. Here's the example you need. Go and get rid of them. Can you see it might be a little bit tricky using this evidence? Sometimes the inspectors went back to Cromwell and said, well, actually, this one's okay. There's no real problem. Cromwell just sent them back. If the visit showed no problem, Cromwell sent them back. Excuse me, go and get a different result, please. I don't want to hear that there's no problem. Many of the inspections, they weren't thorough. They visited the monasteries just for a couple of hours. They couldn't possibly get an accurate result of what was going on. Leighton and Lee, the 2 top men, they visited 120 monasteries. Well, fair enough, you could say. That's okay. In 70 days. Now remember, there's no cars, there's no trains, there's no planes. They've got to travel. So they're doing 2 or 3 monasteries in one day. So you could argue that the evidence was a bit biased. It was fixed. It was set up. Nevertheless, because Cromwell has now got his evidence, he can act. Of course he can. So, March 1536, the dissolution of the smaller monasteries, about 300 of them, worth maybe £200 per year. Then, next year, the following year, 1537, towards the end of that year, the decision was taken to close all monasteries. One of the things that sparked that was this pilgrimage of grace. Some monasteries supported the rebellion, as we'll see in a later video. So, for stage 2, closing the big monasteries, the richer monasteries, old Cromwell, he was a clever man. He came up with a very, very clever, almost a cute idea. He sent his commissioners out around again on visitations to the individual monastery. And he has a chat with the head of the monastery. And somehow these commissioners on the visits, they persuade the head of the home, the head of the religious house, whether it's the abbot or the abbess or the chief monk. He says, look, we're going to close it. If you agree, if you volunteer that it's the right thing to do, in return, you can have a nice pension. Almost like a bribe. He's getting them on his side. Can you see what Cromwell's done? A clever move. So, by 1539, it was a done deal. What we call a fait accompli. The second act for the dissolution of the... The second act for the dissolution of the greater monasteries. The following year, by 1540, there were none left. The monasteries had been dissolved. Religion, politics, finance. Cromwell doing what Henry VIII asked. Very cleverly. Preachers, surveys, inspectors, bribes, finish. The monasteries had gone. So there we have the dissolution of the monasteries. Next video, linked again to this, we're going to look at winners and losers. Who won? Who did well from the dissolution of the monasteries? Equally, on the other side, who did badly? That's coming next. As ever, I hope it's been useful. All the best now.